Il-lejli tajjeb nilqakom għal edizzjoni oħra tal-programm Iswed fuq l-Abjad. Il-lejla programm speċjali ninsabu ġewwa Strasbourg fil-Parlament Ewropew fejn minn hawnhekk minn ġol studios tal-Parlament Ewropew se nkunu qiegħed nagħmel intervisti ma' żewġ protagonisti importanti fil-gruppi rispettivi tagħhom. Fl-ewwel parti ħankun qed niltaqa' ma' Timothy Kirkhope li huwa membru tal-partit tal-grupp konservattiv fil-Parlament Ewropew, persuna influenti f'dan il-grupp. Imbagħad fit-tieni parti tal-programm ħallaqakom ma' Claude Moraes li huwa membru tal-Parlament Ewropew fis-sem is-Soċjalisti. Moraes ġej mill-Partit Laburista Ingliż. Fuq l-aġenda għax hawnhekk fi Strasburgu fuq hekk qegħdin jitkellmu l-aktar it-teddida mill-terrorizmu. U x'se jkun qiegħed jiġri għax in-nies qed isaqsu ħafna l-mistoqsija issa x'se jkun qiegħed jiġri min se jipproteġih liċ-ċittadin quddiem dal-inkwiet kbir illi hawn fid-dinja minħabba terrorizmu u t-teddid mill-terrorizmu. Jiena ħankun qed nistaqsi dawn il-mistoqsijiet bħas-soltu mistoqsijiet li tkun qegħdin tagħmlu b'darba bid-differenza li minflok politiċi lokali se nkunu qegħdin nitkellmu ma' politiċi li ġejjin minn pajjiżi oħrajn, f'dal każ ir-Renju Unit. Ħankun qed nistaqsihom ukoll ftit fuq l-elezzjoni ħadd tkun qiegħda ssir fl-Ingilterra fil-bidu ta' Mejju għax it-tnejn insertaw ġejjin minn dan il-pajjiż. Mr. Kirkhope, thank you very much. Welcome to the show. Let me go to the most important question, the question that people are asking. The people are worried, the people are afraid, the people want solutions. I'm referring to terrorism. Not just stress from terrorism, but what we've seen very recently. The Paris shootings, and then in the last days, the torching, the horrible torching of a Jordanian pilot. People are worried, Mr. Kirkhope. People want solutions. What are the solutions that you, as elected representatives of the people, are going to offer to the people to put their minds at rest?
Well, first of all, we recognize very much that these atrocities are an indication of a world in which random terrorism and criminality has become a much greater threat to people's day-to-day lives in whichever European country they might live. I myself have a background as a minister in the UK, Home Office, dealing with matters such as border controls, but also concerned about terrorism and those issues as they affect us all. But we moved on. The world has become a much more dangerous place now than it was, say, 15 or 20 years ago. We've seen those atrocities that you have mentioned, but that is not the full story. The story is an ongoing one. And we as legislators need to react to the circumstances, but not to do it in a knee-jerk manner. I have had a report on passenger name records, which would apply to information given to airlines when people travel around Europe and into and out of Europe. I've had this report now under my custodianship for 3 years. I have had problems in the political process in the Parliament of getting that report moving, partly because there's an issue, and there should be an issue, about the balance between the need to secure the citizens, protect them, look after them, protect them from the sort of things that you mention, but also to preserve basic freedoms, to safeguard data and information which they might give to airlines or to authorities around Europe, to get that balance right. I believe I have that balance right, and I think that recent events have highlighted the need to have my report moved through the Parliament and into place as soon as possible.
Yes, but 3 years is a very long time. As you rightly said, you're at the forefront, putting forward this proposal, the PNR, the sharing of the personal information system. 3 years is a long time. Many atrocities have happened since then.
Yeah.
Did we have to wait for more atrocities to happen before we actually see? It seems now that we are going to agree. There's going to be an agreement on this.
Well, but you and I agree exactly then, if that is the case. Do we have to wait any longer? I have been making this point to other political groups, some of whom are not as ready to proceed as I am. I think we have the balance right. I think we need to do this, because it is regarded by intelligence services, by our police, by our governments as being necessary in the fight against terrorism. it isn't a silver bullet. This is not the only thing we need to do. Just before I spoke to you in this interview, I was involved in a discussion about a resolution of the Parliament on a much broader range of counter-terrorist measures, which we will hopefully be passing through very quickly. PNR is one element, but I regard that as a vital element, and that is why I have been pushing it so strongly, both from my own experience of these things, of course, historically, but also because of the events in the world, the events in Europe, that are affecting us now.
Okay, explain to us how will the system work? Who will collect the information? What type of information will be shared? And who will have access to this information?
Yes. Well, the information is collected by the airlines. At the moment, we have a thing called API, which is Advanced Passenger Information, which gives some very basic details about a name and address and one or two very minor things. Passenger name records would have a greater number of questions. But these questions would not be particularly intrusive. They would be questions about how the ticket was paid for, whether a travel agent was involved, who is traveling on the itinerary with a person who buys a ticket. There are about 19 questions. If I go and open a new supermarket club card, I have to give them more information without any safeguards at all than we are going to require the airlines to provide in PNR. And who uses this information? This information is gathered by the airlines. It is available under very strict safeguards to the police, certain high levels within police, and the intelligence authorities. But not everybody is going to be watched as a result of this. It is not there to...
Is it already in place in some countries?
It is already in place in the UK. It is already being developed and started in France and several other countries. And all 28 member states would, I think, like to have the benefit of a PNR system. Actually, one of the biggest arguments in favour of having an EU agreement is that if we do not have that agreement and we do not have those safeguards, standard safeguards in place as to how that information is used and for how long it can be retained and so on, then we run the risk of 28 different systems, different questions, different use, where the protection is going to be in individual states. And we've seen this being done outside of the EU. Russia has introduced a system which does not have the same kind of safeguards in it as the EU wants to put into its own arrangements. So, you know, I don't think, and I can understand the concerns, but I don't think that with the sort of precautions we have in mind, that this is going to be a massive threat to the freedom and the liberties of the individual.
We are recording this program on Tuesday morning because this program is aired on Wednesday evening. Are you hopeful that in the coming hours a solution will be found? Do you think you'll be able to convince the other political groups?
I don't think it can be done in that short time frame. But I am rather anxious to get this matter through before the summer break. The reason being, obviously, the Parliament does most of its business between now and the summer. And I do think that recent events suggest that we should not be prepared to allow this matter to go onto a back burner or not to be kept in the forefront. So I will have to fight my way through because I know there are concerns still among certain groups, but I'm trying to persuade them, like the meetings I'm having right now.
People sometimes, that's why people sometimes are skeptical of the way the European Union and the institutions of the European Union function. Because what you are proposing, at least when people hear you saying what you are proposing, a very basic and a very simple way on how to share information to put people's mind at rest and to try as much as possible to stop people from committing the atrocities that we've seen when they are traveling from one country to another within the European Union. So people will rightly so ask the question, why is it that after 3 years waiting for this to happen, we have to wait for a couple of months more?
I think you have to ask others. It's a good question. It's a question, sorry, which I myself asked.
Which group is opposing to this most
Well,
vociferously to this system?
It would be unfair of me, they must speak for themselves, to say which groups have concerns or what those concerns are. But certainly some of the smaller groups have concerns about my proposals at least. The ALDE, the Greens, the GUI, which is the left political group, have concerns. The Socialists themselves have concerns. But, you know, when they explain them to me, I find it very difficult because I have done my best to try and reassure them. And indeed, my new version of my report, the revised version, which is coming out shortly, deals with a lot of these issues very openly and correctly. So I find it very difficult. You know, this is a political institution. It's full of legislators who all want to have their say. But the system that I am offering, what I'm offering here, is the possibility for them to have their say.
I have an interview later on today with Mr. Claude Moraes from the Socialist Group, and I will definitely ask him for his position.
Well, I hope that he can satisfy your question and also reassure people in Malta and elsewhere around Europe that, in fact, you know, we are doing our best to make their lives more secure.
The PNR system, the system that you're referring to, the sharing of information, is definitely a step in the right direction. However, it is not the only solution. In Paris, in the Paris shootings, we've seen homegrown terrorists, if you like. This system will not stop the atrocities that we've seen in Paris. So now tell me, speak to me about other solutions that as politicians you are looking at, which will, as much as possible, address terrorism and terrorism threats.
I think one of the things we need to look at is radicalization of our young people at home. You quite rightly suggest that a number of atrocities have been committed by homegrown terrorists, people who may have been away and come back. Of course, PNR would help us with that issue, but also people who have never been away from their home but are radicalized in their religious or other thoughts. And I think that there is a very big challenge for us in the 21st century. We must look at education, and we must also look at the whole question of community and race relations. I had that job when I was Home Office Minister as well as my other ones. I dealt with immigration and I dealt with race relations. And it seems to me that having the communities together and understanding each other is going to be so big a challenge that we have to deal with it. And when you talk about religions, we have to look at those religions and see what they really are saying, because to my mind, the behavior of some of these people is justified by them because of a religious belief. Now that cannot be right. The major religions of the world, I know, would say that they, all of them, have the promotion of peace and understanding within their basic texts. I was at a meeting just a day or two ago, an interfaith meeting in my own constituency in Yorkshire, which had there representatives of the Muslim, Sikh, Hindu, Christian and Jewish faiths, all together and all talking about peace and understanding. That was a great meeting, actually. The only trouble is that that message is not always getting through, not always through to the practitioners of certain religions, and not always through to some of the younger people and their idealistic interpretation.
Which brings me to my next question, in fact. If you look at the situation in Ukraine, for example, or in Libya, which is the situation, the best way how to describe it is that it's a disaster in Libya. Politicians, states, some are advocating military intervention, whilst others are advocating integration rather than intervention. Which one do you prefer? Intervention, military intervention, or integration of people so that nobody is left on the margins?
Military intervention can only ever be a short-term expedient to, if you like, rectify a situation that is out of control, but it can never be a long-term proposition or solution. We are seeing a lot of violence, which I'm afraid is not the sort of violence we were used to in the 80s. The 1980s, I look back now when we had a Cold War, where we had clear dividing lines, really, between two concepts, between what I regard as the freedom and the democracy of the West and an alternative approach. And the threat was there, and it was, to some extent, a balanced threat. Now we have got large numbers of smaller wars, smaller conflicts going on around the world, in particular not far from Europe, and Malta will be aware of that particularly, I know. These are very serious because they are involving a lot of so-called idealistic people who are fighting in the name of religion. This is something which I think is very serious. And because there are so many different factions and so many different groups, it's not always easy to know, even if you were to deploy military might, where to deploy it, for how long and on whose behalf. So I think this is a very, very difficult and delicate thing. And we need a lot of diplomacy. We do need diplomacy. I do not believe myself that military intervention as a first stage of anything is ever going to really be the priority. We ought to look at diplomatic ways of dealing with things.
My last question is about the UK and the elections, the upcoming general elections. First of all, are you hopeful that the Conservative Party will manage to pull it off in May?
Well, despite our discussion being all about conflicts and terrorism and so on, when it comes to general elections, the economic circumstances of the country really are the big thing. And I'm fairly confident that the economic management of the UK in the hands of David Cameron and the Conservatives really has been very successful, bearing in mind what we started with. We started with a situation where the country was in very serious economic situation, where individual families and companies were suffering enormously. We have moved that along. The country is now growing very successfully, and although we still have debts, we're paying them off. But we are actually, I think, able to look with some confidence in the future. We are probably the strongest economy now. I think the Germans are fairly strong, but we are also a very strong economy in Europe. And my own opinion is that that is likely to continue as long as we maintain a sensible government. And obviously, it seems to me when it comes to it, the people will choose to, I hope, will choose to back David Cameron.
Which brings me to my last question. The economy, you said, is doing relatively well in the United Kingdom. So is it a sensible decision to put on the table the proposal that the people can eventually choose that the UK withdraws from the European Union?
Well, no, it's not a question of putting to the people the choice to withdraw. The choice is to stay in or withdraw. They have to make a choice. That is exactly the point about a choice.
Why do you need to put that choice to the people, to give that choice to the people?
Because I think the political pressures and political demands of the United Kingdom suggest that that question had to be put to the people. I think it would have been very difficult not to have put that question to them. But at least with the Conservatives...
You mean the political demands?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think it's very, very difficult. There were pressures building up all over. There are demands in the country for that. You can see that in all the polling. They want to have a question put. But I think the important thing is to take the Conservative approach, which is to negotiate, to discuss, and to try and get a lot of agreement around Europe for certain reforms to the European Union.
Rather than withdrawing from the European Union.
Rather than withdrawing. I mean, get those things, the reforms in place, and then ask the people to confirm the position. I mean, I personally would very much hope that we will get success there and that we will be able to reaffirm our position as members of the European Union. But let's see. I'm confident that that's likely to happen.
Mr. Kirkhope, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Bekk ġejna fit-tmiem tal-ewwel parti tal-intervista fil-programm Iswed fuq l-Abjad minn din l-edizzjoni speċjali minn ġewwa Strasburgu. Issa se nagħmlu waqfa qasira ħafna reklami, imbagħad meta niġu lura id-diskussjoni se tkompli se niċċaqalqu minn ġo dan l-istudju ħammorru f'parti oħra tal-Parlament Ewropew fejn hemmhekk se nkunu qegħdin niltaqgħu ma' Claude Moraes illi kif għattilkom huwa membru tal-Parlament Ewropew f'isem il-Partit Laburista Ingliż. Miegħu ħankun qed insaqsi uħud minn dawn il-mistoqsijiet inkluż ħankun qed insaqsi jekk jaħsebx li l-partit tiegħu f'Mejju li ġej għandu xi ċans li jirbaħ l-elezzjoni ġenerali. Niltaqgħu minn hawn ftit tal-ħin ieħor. Nilqakom għat-tieni parti tal-programm Iswed fuq l-Abjad kif għattilkom miegħi fl-istudio issa Claude Moraes li huwa membru tal-Parlament Ewropew f'isem il-Partit Laburista Ingliż ġej minn Londra u wkoll deputat mexxej fil-grupp tal-Partit Laburista fil-grupp tal-Ewropew tal-Parlament Ewropew. Jiena miegħu wkoll ħankun qed niddiskuti b'mod ewlieni t-teddida mit-terrorizmu però wkoll suġġetti oħra li huma ta' interess ġenerali b'mod partikolari anke l-elezzjoni li l-elezzjoni ġenerali li se ssir ġewwa l-Ingilterra. Mr. Moraes, thank you very much. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure.
Let me start with the most pertinent question. People are worried, people are very concerned, Mr. Moraes, about terrorism, the terrorism threats and the actual terrorism that we've seen after the Paris shooting, for example, or the torching of the Jordanian pilot. People expect leaders to come up with solutions. They expect you to come up with solutions. What are you looking at? What are the solutions that you're going to offer to the people to put their minds at rest?
Well, I think there are real concerns, and these concerns are genuinely based on real threats. And the real threats are based on what we call foreign fighters, homegrown people who are genuinely causing threats, not just in Paris, but in other countries. So it's a real threat. And people are rightly looking at the European Parliament because the European Parliament is one place where there are some legislative powers on some key issues. And these key issues were given to the European Parliament by the Lisbon Treaty to do certain things on anti-terrorism measures. We don't have all the powers. Most of those powers are with the Member States. Member States have most powers when it comes to intelligence and fighting terrorism, sharing information. But in some small issues, like the sharing of passenger name records to catch terrorists using data, here we have some powers, and we need to use those powers.
We're going to discuss that later on in the interview because that is very important. However, we are in the building, we are in the European Parliament. Meetings take place daily. Many meetings take place daily. Many MEPs are present here to discuss. People sometimes get this impression that this is a large talking shop. People want solutions, but they are not seeing these tangible results. They are not seeing these solutions. So may I ask you to be more concrete, more precise in your answers? What type of solutions are you looking at?
I can understand that people see a parliament, they can see what they might envisage as a talking shop, but they want action. And the action we can offer here in the European Parliament is genuine action. When you want to fight terrorists, it's very tough. And one of the ways to fight terrorists is intelligence, sharing. And the key ways the Parliament can offer that is concrete. In the aftermath of the Paris attacks, virtually all of the intelligence leads, all of it, came from Europol, the policing agency. That's our agency, the European Union agency, over 100 leads. Also with the attack in Belgium, the leads, many of the intelligence leads, were also coming from Europol, but also other leads. So remember, this is the European Union in action. But secondly, we need to think about something called passenger name records. This is where we share information through flight information, the movements of potential terrorists. Here we have to be careful as well, because we're dealing with the information of private citizens which we give, so we have to make sure that our privacy is also protected. But it's action. We need to do it. We need to legislate. So people expect the European Parliament not just to talk, but also to have action, but also to protect our privacy as well. So we need to do that. We need to not be slow in this, and I think that's what the expectation is.
What kept you from implementing the PNR, the personal name record? Because from what I've seen and from from the research I did, it seems that the socialist group and even the liberals, they opposed at a certain point the introduction of the sharing of the personal information of passengers that are traveling within the EU. Did you have to wait for these terrorist cases, incidents to take place before you actually took action?
That's right. In 2011, the balance between privacy and data gathering on PNR was not the right proposal, and I think people need to understand that you have to get the balance right in the gathering of mass data. There's two issues. One is, you may remember in the London bombings in 2005, there was a rush to legislation. I represent London, and you may remember that the European Court of Justice struck down and abolished that legislation and said it was wrong. So when you have legislation in this area, you have to get it right. You have to make sure that it's quality legislation, that it stands the test of time. So it's important now to have PNR legislation that is solid, concrete, so that if Malta is using it, if the UK is using it, France is using it, it's not in danger of being struck down by the European Court of Justice or anyone else. It's there to be used for a long time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we have to make sure that when mass amounts of data is being used, it's being used securely and it's being shared properly. And it's our job to get that right. So whether you've got legislators in Malta or here in the European Parliament, we must do our job correctly and quickly. So we now need to get on with this process of getting the PNR right. You're quite right, in 2011 it wasn't done, and now we need to do it properly and for the correct purposes.
We are recording this program on Tuesday morning. Discussions are taking place right now in this building about the PNR system and other solutions. On the PNR system, how are the discussions going on? Do you think there will be an agreement between both sides, mainly the Conservatives and the Socialists?
Well, I'm chair of the Justice and Home Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, and it's my job to try and bring all the sides together. And I'm very hopeful that the sides will come together. On the one hand, we have the Parliament Rapporteur, Mr. Kirkhope, who you're also talking to,
yes.
And I'm very hopeful that he will push forward his proposal. I'm hopeful that the European Commission will look at this proposal as well, and I'm very hopeful that together that the Parliament and the Commission are going to do their job and really listen, as you've said in one of your questions to me, that we will be seen to be doing our job and do our job. Because when you have terrorist outrages, people in Malta, people across Europe want to see us doing our job and for us to do our job, not just to talk about it. So I think while PNR is only one of many tools in this job, it's not the only thing. But people want to see us do the job that we were given to do. Remember that it's member states that have most of the power in this area, but where the European Parliament has some powers, we need to be seen to be doing it and get on with it quickly.
Libya is practically burning. The situation in Ukraine is very, very worrying. Some states are putting forward their solutions, or what they think are the solutions to the situations. They are saying intervention. Others are saying integration rather than intervention. What do you think should be the solution? Intervention, military force, for example, in Ukraine, in Libya, where the presence of ISIS has been growing at a very alarming rate, or integration of people of different beliefs, of different culture, coming together, making sure that nobody is left on the margins?
Well, first Libya. I think we need to take Libya, we also need to look at Syria, and if you really look at the position of Malta, a small island, my real concern here is that there's not enough solidarity in the European Union. And as chair of the Justice and Home Affairs Committee, our biggest concern for Malta is that there is not enough cooperation in the European Union to deal with the fallout of what is happening in Libya and indeed Syria in relation to the migration in the Mediterranean. The European Union, the member states, are not doing their job to deal with what is happening in relation to Malta and those people who are taking the biggest impact. Italy, for example, is playing a disproportionate role, and the impact on places like Malta is too high. Now, the European Commission and the European Parliament are playing their role, but the member states will not step up to the plate. We have seen this repeatedly, and we are really getting concerned. For example, when Mare Nostrum finished and we went to Operation Tritron, we warned, and I warned, that this would have a disproportionate effect on Malta. So this is not a party political issue. Across the political spectrum, we are saying have solidarity with Malta. The European Union is there to work together. So the fallout from Libya, as you asked, is actually the fallout for the European Union. And that's the case with Syria. So when I went to the European Council in Riga, I argued, as did the Maltese delegation, that solidarity means burden sharing, it means resettlement programs, and those member states that argue against this are arguing against the interests of Malta, and I believe against the interests of the European Union. We need to cooperate. That is what Libya means to me when you ask about Libya.
You have an election coming up, a general election coming up in May, beginning of May, 7th of May, in the UK. On the cards, on the table, withdrawal from the European Union. What is your position? Are you a proponent of withdrawal from the European Union, or rather renegotiating, trying to establish better relationships with the European Union?
Well, I'm very proud that I can stand before you going into the British general election, which I know many Maltese viewers are watching with great interest. The connection between Malta and the UK is so strong historically that we are the only party that is saying no to a referendum on the EU. And the reason we are saying that is because we are a pro-European Labour Party and we want to be in the European Union.
That's not very popular to say in the UK.
You say it's not popular. Virtually all of British business wants to stay in the European Union. And I believe there is a majority. Yes, there's a division here. Yes, some people want a referendum. In fact, some people in the Labour Party want a referendum. But I believe it's in the British interest to stay in the European Union. And it's an unstable position for us to be calling for a referendum when we are healing our economy, when austerity still exists, and we are now in a position where we're bringing our economy together and we're starting to get economic growth after the economic crash and after austerity. And I think that's where we should be. Where we should be is making the pro-European case for the Labour Party. And I think we're very proud to be going into this election with that case. So, yes, the Labour Party is proud of that case. And I think, you know, if we are faced with a referendum, if that should happen, we will be arguing to stay in the EU. And I'm sure Maltese viewers will want us to do that. They'll want the UK to stay in the EU. I think it's a very dangerous position the Conservative Party have taken us into. What the Conservatives have done is a very reckless thing. They've just named a date, 2017. And you may know, and your viewers may understand, 2017 date is also the time when it's the presidency, British presidency of the EU. So you can see the awkwardness of choosing that date. It's a date picked out of thin air. This is not the way to run a referendum for a major nation like the UK. No. You know, we're serious about our membership of the EU. The Labour Party has the correct policy for our membership of the EU, for business, for the people of Britain, for our future, and that's where we should be.
What are the prospects for the Labour Party at this election? You have a new leader, you try to modernize again the party after a time when the Labour Party was in a difficult situation following the Blair's leadership and the successful years of Tony Blair's leadership. What are the prospects at the next election? Are you confident that the Labour Party will manage to pull it off in this year in May?
Virtually every poll is putting us narrowly ahead, but nobody is arguing that it's going to be anything but a close election, and we're not complacent about the result. So we are going in working incredibly hard and fighting every seat. That is the position we're in. So we're coming at it knowing that no party, having lost an election in British political history, has come back and won an overall majority. So we know that the stakes are very high, but every poll is putting us narrowly ahead, and we are not complacent. We are going to fight to win, and that's the position we're going to be in. But of course we know it's going to be a close election. The polls are already saying that, so it's going to be tough, but exciting. And I know that Maltese citizens will be watching our general election with great interest. Yeah. But we're going to fight to win for the Labour Party.
We have seen recently the rise of Eurosceptics and the leftists, very leftist, one may add, of parties, of leftist parties in Europe, most recently in Greece. Are people angry? Is the general public angry at the European Union, or is the general public angry at austerity measures being imposed on member states, which is resulting in these results? And as a second question, are you worried about the rise of these parties to power? Greece, very recently,
I think the UK
political analysts are saying that it could also happen in Spain.
I think the UK is not immune to this Europeanization of politics, or fragmentation of politics. With austerity has come, despite our first past the post general election system, a fragmentation of politics, the build of new parties. So we have UKIP, we have a growth now of the Green Party, and we have a first past the post system which doesn't lend itself to the growth of small parties. So we have not been immune to it in the UK. So that has also meant that for this general election, unusually, we have some high percentages showing for UKIP, for the Greens, and this makes it more likely than ever before that we will have a very close election. Possibilities of hung parliament has been talked about. But nevertheless, with the first past the post system, it is still possible in our general election to have an overall majority for one of the two big parties, and certainly for one of the two big parties to govern in a very clean way. And I think that's unique in the UK. We have a first past the post system. I understand you have a first past the post system, possibly inherited from the UK and Malta as well. So I think
you're very knowledgeable of the situation in Malta.
Yeah, and I think I think for the UK this allows us to govern in that fixed way. But let's be clear, we have a Europeanisation of politics in the UK. This is where the small parties are taking a populist stance. They are building on the anti-politics feeling. They're building on austerity. They're understanding the discontent and the gap between rich and poor, which clearly does exist. So the main parties, including my party, have to understand this. They have to realise that this exists. So we're not immune from this in the UK, and it's reflected in the polls, and it will be reflected in our general election result.
My last question. You are one of the longest serving members of the European Parliament. If I'm not mistaken, this is your fourth time that you've been elected to the European Parliament. What are your views of the current Juncker Commission?
Well, the current Juncker Commission is unique in the sense that they have created a kind of strange structure of vice presidents and a different structure. And in my view, really we are testing to see if it will work. And it had better work, because Europe today has massive challenges for its citizens. For Malta and for us, it has to tackle austerity. Citizens are desperate for solutions from Europe and they want answers. So this structure is really only meaningful in the sense that it delivers for people. At the moment, in my committee, we have 5 commissioners who are answering to us. And I don't really care how many commissioners there are, as long as they answer and as long as they provide solutions to austerity and to the big questions. And for me, in Justice and Home Affairs, the values issues on immigration affects Malta, you've seen the effects. These issues have to be answered. So structure doesn't matter as long as they deliver.
Mr. Moraes, thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Mela, dak kien Claude Moraes illi kien magħna għal din l-intervista bekk ġejna fit-tmiem tal-intervista tagħna hawnhekk minn ġewwa il-Parlament Ewropew ġewwa Strasburg. U grazzi ħafna l-Uffiċċju tal-Parlament illi jeni ħafna biex inkun nista' nagħmlu dan il-programm in-nies kollha li assistew f'din il-produzzjoni, inkluż David Stellini mill-grupp tal-IPP li tal-għajnuna tiegħu ukoll biex dan il-programm seta' isir. Jiena nkun magħkom il-ġimgħa d-dieħla l-edizzjoni oħra tal-programm Iswed fuq l-Abjad infakkarkom li dar-programm ikun imtenn il-ħadd fit-3:30 ta' wara nofsinhar. Il-kumplament tal-lejl it-tajjeb il kulħadd inselmilkom.